Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on OMTimes' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Throughout the years that I've been conducting interviews on science, consciousness, and spirituality, I've read numerous mind-shifting books and heard goodness knows how many extraordinary stories. But the story you're going to hear today is so far beyond remarkable that I've struggled to find words to adequately describe it. All I can say by way of introduction is that what you're about to hear is a story that I didn't know until I read it, that I, and no doubt countless millions of seekers, have been waiting for our entire lives. Christopher Bache is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he taught for 33 years. A fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, he's also adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies and on the advisory board for Grof Transpersonal Training and the Grof Foundation. An award-winning teacher and international speaker, Chris Bache, joins me now to discuss his book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, which has been held as a gripping account of an utterly unique and extraordinary hero's journey that opens our minds and hearts to a new vision of our universe and ourselves as inseparable from the ineffable being that we have called God. Chris Bache, welcome.
Hi, Sandie. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
This is a long-awaited interview, I have to say, Chris.
Yeah.
So, little background. In 1979, you took the first step on a life-changing journey to explore your mind and the mind of the universe as deeply and systematically as possible with the help of LSD. If you had known then that it would take 20 years of excruciating pain, suffering, bliss, and intense purification, plus many more years of digesting, processing, organizing, and writing to publish this book, would you still have put yourself through it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I would. I think knowing now if I had known then what I know now, I would have been gentler on myself. I would have used a gentler protocol, balancing high versus low doses, balancing LSD with psilocybin and ayahuasca. I still would have taken the journey, but it might not have been taken as aggressively as I did.
Yeah. Well, knowing the outcome, you can't really say, no, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
So you experienced 73 high-dose LSD sessions following protocols established by Stanislav Grof with the intention of engaging hyper-intensive states in a way that would allow the initial chaos at each new level to clear and also allow your own biophysical and psychological systems to adapt. How did you know the precise dosage to accomplish that in the way that you wanted to?
Well, Stan was very clear in his early books and in LSD Psychotherapy. It was published in 1980. The protocol differences between psycholytic and low-dose therapy versus psychedelic high-dose therapy. Psycholytic running doses anywhere from 50, 150 micrograms, and high-dose psychedelic therapy between 350 to 500. And at that time, high-dose psychedelic therapy was being used at Spring Grove Hospital in Baltimore, and they were trying to basically trigger something approximating a near-death experience for people who were dying. They were terminal patients and trying to give them a glimpse of where they were going. And I thought, well, if you could do this work 3 times safely, then you could do it more than 3 times safely. And I chose to work with high doses of LSD for a couple of reasons. One, I had a false model of what the project was. The model I had was a model of personal transformation. I thought this was about my personal healing, my personal spiritual awakening. That turned out to be an incomplete, profoundly incomplete model. And I was thinking that, spiritual awakening is about clearing your karma. Our karma ultimately is finite. And by working with high doses, I would basically uh, I knew it would be more difficult work, but I thought of myself as basically biting off my karma in larger bites and clearing it faster. Turns out that that's a false model. Personal transformation was too small to describe it. And the doses I took from the literature. I basically wanted to push my system as hard as I could to be efficient. I mean, I was in a dual career marriage. Getting time for these sessions was very complicated. I had to balance a lot of schedules, and I wanted to get as much done in every session as I could. Uh, Again, what I learned along the way is because consciousness is unified at its source, that when you hyperstimulate consciousness, you're not just hyperstimulating your personal field of consciousness, you're hyperstimulating some portion of the unified field of consciousness. And therefore, the dynamics that get activated, the dynamics of healing and purification and illumination, are much, much larger than personal dynamics.
At what point did you realize this wasn't going to be a personal journey at all, that there was so much more going on?
Well, for about the first 2.5 years, it followed very much the material that Stan Grof had been tracking. My first 2.5 years of work were very much perinatal in nature, going through the death rebirth process, re-experiencing one's birth, experiencing a profound confrontation with death and the meaninglessness of existence. But then this culminated in a crushing ego death experience and a liberating ego death experience. And then, according to Stan's early descriptions, what I was expecting is that after going through ego death, access to transpersonal reality would get easier. But what happened in my sessions is that I began to go through periods of vast suffering that got deeper and deeper and larger, terrible suffering and pain, not personal, collective, opening up to the suffering of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of years of time. And at first I thought this represented a deepening of ego death, but it went on for so long and it involved so many people that eventually I had no alternative but to come to the conclusion that what was being healed or transformed in this process was not my personal psyche, but some aspect of the collective psyche of humanity. That just as personal trauma gets internalized in our personal psyche and can produce pathology, likewise, the vast quantities of trauma that humanity has absorbed through history gets collected and internalized in the collective psyche and produces a kind of social pathology at the collective level. And something was using my sessions to basically address and heal to some degree this collective trauma.
So there didn't seem to be anything random about this journey, because sometimes you didn't have a session for long periods, even years, but when you went back, you always seemed to, catch up where you were at the time before.
Yeah. That was my sense of it too, that I was engaging a long and sustained conversation, communion, initiation with a larger consciousness, and the size and scale of this consciousness kept deepening and changing as my work continued. I always felt myself engaging an intelligence. When this is most dramatic, perhaps, this continuity across time. I did 4 years of work. I stopped for 6 years, and then I started again for another 10 years of work. When I stopped, I was working on the ocean of suffering material. In the purification phase of a session, I was engaged in this ocean of suffering. I stopped for 6 years. 6 years later, in a completely different time of my life with different expectations, when I went into the work again, the ocean of suffering started exactly where it had stopped and continued, indicating clearly that the intelligence that I was engaging was guiding what was happening. It was in charge of my sessions, and all I did was really open up, isolate myself from the world, open up, and follow wherever it wanted to take me. And I found that if I trusted myself completely and surrendered to where it would take me, I would go through these intense purification processes or death processes. Eventually, it would culminate in some type of crisis or breakthrough, and then I would be spun into ecstatic revelatory experiences for the remainder of the session. And the next session would begin the cycle again. So I learned to trust that process.
But the suffering, I was listening to it on Audible as well as reading the book. And there were times when I was, speaking to you and saying, my goodness, why are you going back? It is so painful.
You go back not because I don't like pain. Who likes pain? For nothing like that. You go back for the joy that's waiting on the other side of pain. You go back with the understanding that this suffering, this pain is in some way a purification process, which I did not understand the full scope of it at the time, but I trusted Stan's work. And it was affirmed in my work that this is a purification process, and that when you go through it, then the doors open. And that's why you do it, for the revelations, for the insights, for the visions, for the opportunity to enter into such deep and profound communion with the universe.
So the suffering is the gateway.
It's a gateway. It's just we have to let go of being small in order to enter into being large. And it's not always easy to let go of being small, but it's not just letting go of your personal identity. In therapy, we often focus on ego death, and many of the mystical traditions focus on ego death. But what I found was that ego death was just the first of many patterns of death and rebirth, so that what one is letting go of at deeper levels of the journey is much larger, much deeper than just egoic structures. And it's such a mystery that at the end of the book, I actually have an appendix where I ask the question, what dies? When you're so far beyond ego death, and yet you are still having sensations of dying, loss of control, what is it that's actually dying in that process?
Yeah, exactly. And when we listen to it, we can't help asking the same question. So I don't want to focus too much on individual sessions, but there was one that I really did want to bring up. And it's actually a whole collection of sessions where you experience life as many different women in turn. What do you think was the purpose of those experiences, and how did they impact you?
Well, that was my ego death experience, where the universe, after this is the 10th session, 9th, 10th session, it just broke me like a twig. It just took my identity and snapped it. Now, I had begun the day as a white Ivy League educated philosopher, passionately concerned with the meaning of existence. And the universe forced me to become the exact opposite of that. I became women. I became women of color. I became women who were not interested in the meaning of life at all, who were not educated at all. And it did not allow me to experience, I was myself, but I was myself in all these other roles, other modes. And it terrified me. It just scared the bejeebus out of me, and I fought it. But eventually, when I gave up and I surrendered, and I allowed myself to become all these women, then suddenly things shifted, and I was taken under the arm of the Great Mother and initiated into the lives of hundreds of women, the more positive side of female experience, given many experiences of women's lives, conceiving, giving birth, loving husbands, loving children. And I think the fundamental message here was not reclaim your former lives as women. I know I have former lives as women. That has never been a question for me. I think the issue was where you were going, gender does not exist. Let go. So I was being taken into a level of reality where male, female is irrelevant. But to do that, I had to be broken of my male identity. I had to allow myself to go into some larger identity, and becoming women was simply just part of that breaking process.
The whole 20 years seems to have been quite a massive break-in process. I mean, you were doing this, nobody knew about it except your wife. You weren't allowed to talk about it to anyone, or you didn't allow yourself to. You were teaching mature students philosophy, and often, you know, there were aspects of things that you were teaching where your experiences would have been the perfect example to offer them, but you couldn't do that. What was that like for you?
It wasn't so bad in the beginning, but it got increasingly difficult as I went on, especially when I could feel a question coming from students that had personal, deep significance to them. And an answer would spontaneously rise from my person, but an answer that was grounded in my psychedelic experience. And I couldn't, some of them I could lay off onto Stan Grof's experiences or other psychedelic research experiences, but some of them I couldn't lay off, and I could not bring my own psychedelic experiences forward. And I began to experience a catch in my throat. My voice would actually I would lose control for a split second, and it would sound like a little bark coming out of my voice. It was embarrassing. I mean, I was literally strangling on what I wanted to say and was not allowed to say. And that became difficult because the cost of doing this work I knew would be my silence. And I paid that price, but I did not realize in the beginning that when you commit to dividing your life in this way, to have a daytime job as a straight professor and then a nighttime job as a psychonaut, that it causes fractures in your psyche, which reach deeper than you may have anticipated in the beginning. And in the end, these cracks were only able to be healed when I finally came out of the psychedelic closet and began to allow myself to speak openly about these experiences.
Mm. Most people these days, especially in the spiritual arena, are familiar with NDEs, reincarnation, channeled works that explain who we are and where we go in the afterlife. And you've taught courses on these yourselves, but your experience took you way beyond where anyone has gone before. It gave you a whole new vision of the bardo. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the classic understanding of the bardo, I think, was affirmed in my sessions. That is, there are many, many, many layers of spiritual reality. And when we die, we return to that layer that reflects our spiritual development or our spiritual maturity. And it's a social domain. There are other beings there, not only other incarnate beings or discarnate beings, but there are also guardians and guides and so forth. And the basic idea is after you die, you go through a debrief process in which you process your most recently completed life. You learn what you did poorly and what you did very well. You go through this process, and then you go through kind of a returning to the world of spirit, to returning home. And eventually you go through, when it's time to incarnate again, to the choice process of incarnating again. And because the evolution of the soul is so vast and covers such a wide spectrum of development, it takes many, many, many lifetimes to actualize the full potential of a human existence. And so there are many tiers of the Bardo domain. And my experience affirms this classic vision. I had many experiences of kind of tapping into Bardo reality, and it's a collective reality. I think the ocean of suffering kind of is analogous to the Buddhist concept of the hell realm. I tapped into levels which would be analogous to the high deity realm in the Buddhist cosmology of the 6 lokas or the 6 realms. And there is a reality that's outside the Bardo. When you basically, in a sense, graduate from the Earth system, when you move beyond that spiritual echo of time-space experience and enter into the reality beyond all Bardo existence, and that is correlated with what I would describe as the diamond luminosity, the domain of diamond luminosity.
Why do you call it that?
Because that was the experience. One encounters light often in deep spiritual experiences and near-death experiences, in psychedelic experiences. When you go through a death rebirth process, often you have the sensation of being flooded with light, encountering light. It's almost a universal in the spiritual traditions. And I had experienced light at many forms and many times in my practice. But when I came to this advanced stage of my work, which started with the 45th session, I encountered a light that was unlike anything I had encountered previously. It was incredibly bright, incredibly beautiful, and clear. The hardest thing to describe, when I say light, it's almost like it becomes so refined and so intense, it becomes invisible. It's just clear. Your mind is just so incredibly clear. And I came to understand what the Buddhists meant when they say, touching this for 1 second undoes thousands of years of living in the shadows of karma. It is radically pure, clear. And once I touched that, I wasn't interested in exploring any of the other dimensions of spiritual reality that I had encountered before, which include collective dimensions, the collective unconscious, archetypal reality, even dimensions of causal oneness. This was something totally, completely different. And in the last 5 years of my work, in 26 sessions, which is 1/3 of my entire journey, I only touched this reality 4 times. Okay. And every time I touched it, it would trigger more purification, more detoxification, and a year's worth of work before I was able to come back and touch it again.
Wow. And was that something, having touched it, that kept you going? Had you seeking it again and again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last third of my work, that was my agenda, was to go back, so do whatever I needed to do to go back into that reality.
So if I understand this right, and I haven't read a huge amount about the Bardo, but what you're saying is that there are these different layers, if you like, almost stages, and over probably millennia, we gradually go through them. But you went through them, in that much time. What kind of effect does that have on someone?
Well, I want to be careful here. I think what happens in a therapeutically focused psychedelic session or spiritually focused psychedelic session is that you speed up what is happening in life at a slower pace in a natural process. So reincarnation, as I understand it, we are growing, we are evolving. We die, we return to soul consciousness. We're born, we contract down into egoic consciousness, we die, we go back into soul consciousness. and we keep this up and keep this up over long periods of time. We choose lives which challenge us, stretch us, heal us, allow us to develop new talents, new capacities, to deepen the capacities that we've started. What happens, I think, in psychedelic therapy is that that whole process is accelerated. I think this is true for meditation. In meditation, when you do long sustained retreats of meditation, you are speeding up the process that's taking place at a slower pace in ordinary life. And so you do bite off larger pieces of personal karma, but then something else takes over. It's not about your personal enlightenment. It's not about your personal development. Your ties to the human family, your ties to the family of life, your ties to the universe deepen, and you begin to feel a sense of dance or a sense of engagement of this deep, profound life process. And I think you can take it too far than is comfortable. You can take it so deeply. You can be dissolved so completely into these vast flows of consciousness and vast dimensions of existence that it's very hard to come back out of them. And it's hard in the sense that it's hard to leave the joy. It's hard to leave the clarity and the ecstasy and come back into time and space. Now, that doesn't mean because you've touched them and because you've known them, it doesn't mean that you can stabilize that awareness back inside time and space. It doesn't mean that you have accomplished what some of the great spiritual teachers have accomplished who can abide 1 foot in, 1 foot out in those realities. I really, really emphasize this is a path of temporary immersion. It's temporary. You have not, just because you've had a temporary experience of oneness of life or transcendence, doesn't mean that you are as fully developed a spiritual being as somebody who can abide in that reality. And all honor truly to the great spiritual masters who have the capacity to abide in that reality. So I wouldn't say necessarily that I accomplished all of those evolutionary journeys in one lifetime, but I certainly did do something pointing in that direction.
But you can't unknow what you know. And when you come back knowing what you know, it must be hell to, have to, move into a world that is so far away from that is just, falling apart on every level. I mean, how do you cope with that? It's such a dichotomy.
It is challenging. There are mitigating processes, though, too, because the deeper your experience of the intelligence of life and the joy of the creative intelligence in manifesting existence, then you begin to look around you and you see the universe for what it is. The universe is the body of the divine, the body of God. The universe is the manifestation of the intelligence, of a profound intelligence. And once you touch that intelligence, I mean, we all know what intelligence looks and feels like. We recognize it when we meet it in people. And this is a cosmic intelligence that just overwhelms you with its brilliance and its wisdom and overwhelms you with love, unlike beyond anything I had ever known in this lifetime. And I've known love in this lifetime. This is a different order of love. And once you experience those things, then it changes how you see the universe. It changes how you see life. And it also gives you a larger horizon within which to understand the human experience. I mean, I adopted reincarnation on the basis of the empirical evidence early in my career. I read Ian Stevenson's work. I read the early work on a past life therapist and I was convinced intellectually that reincarnation was a fact of life, but it still takes years to truly absorb and live into the fabric of a universe that pulses in a reincarnation cycle, not just for the individual, but for the entire human species. So I had experiences in which I understood my current life as a continuity of extending from previous lifetimes. But I also had, at a deeper level, experiences of the entire human species pulsing, generation by generation, pulsing in as a reincarnating species, and that all of our individual challenges and our individual karma was a fractal manifestation of this larger species challenge and this species karma that we were working. And when you have those experiences, you look at other human beings differently. You look at the planet differently. You look at the galaxy differently. There is a sense of deeper participation in a mystery which you may not understand the details of, but you can feel the joy because you know you've touched the intelligence that's behind it, and that makes it more joyful to enter into it. Now, there is a sadness that you can't sustain those peak experiences, but in another month or two, or I was doing this about 4 or 5 times a year, I would go back into this reality, and not every time necessarily, but I would go back often enough that I would be able to drink deeply again. The full cost of how deep I went did not really emerge until I stopped my sessions. At the end of the journey, the universe basically told me it was time to stop, and I could feel that it was time to stop, and I stopped. But it was only then, when I wasn't returning in a few months to have another deep communion with my beloved, that I began to realize the true cost of overextending myself as deeply as I had into the transcendental side of existence.
Mm. Before we go to the break, there's one question. You said that the universe is the body of God. What are we?
We are part of the universe, so we are part of the body of God too. We are part of the manifestation of the intention of the universe to create. Our mind, just as our body is rooted in the quantum reality of life and the atomic reality of life, and the whole evolutionary story is built into the nerves and the vascular systems and the organs of our body. So we become inseparable from life as it is manifesting in the galaxy, in the planet, on this continent. Likewise, our minds are part of the creative intelligence that's manifesting existence. That's why when we go deep into our minds, we drop down into the depth of our personal mind, and we find that there is no floor at the bottom of our mind. We fall right through into the mind of the species, right through into the mind of the universe. And when you go that deep, then the Hindu teaching, Atman is Brahman, the essence of the individual is the essence of the totality, that just becomes the most natural thing in the world. That becomes core truth. And one of the, likewise, a core truth is oneness. Brahman is one. And we are an aspect, a fractal manifestation of that oneness. Once one has known that, then even when you go back to paying your bills and doing the things we do in the physical world, all you have to do is step back, and then you can reappreciate these deeper truths, which are the deeper pulsing of life.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a short break now. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. My guest today is eminent philosopher and theologian, speaker and author, Christopher M. Bache, whose latest book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, which rigorously chronicles his intensive systematic 73 session, 20 years psychedelic series of journeys into a unified field of consciousness that underlies all physical existence. This is completely mind-blowing. So I need a break just to reset my mind so that I can ask intelligent questions. We'll be back in a few moments. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Chris Bache, you've made it quite clear that there is an evolutionary dimension to all of this. And as you move into the later chapters in the book where you talk about the birth of the diamond soul, you began to see that we are at an evolutionary cusp, and the global systems crisis that we're all experiencing right now is part of that. For what point? What is the ultimate purpose here of all of this happening?
Yeah. Well, let me break that down into two parts. The classical vision, first on reincarnation, a few words. The classical vision of reincarnation, as it's held in most Eastern traditions, is that you grow, you get clear, kinder, more generous, you cultivate deeper and better qualities, and eventually you come to a spiritual maturing where your consciousness opens to the core of your being, and you awaken to the fact that the essence of your nature is in fact the essence of all nature, and that all beings and you are sharing the same nature. There's an explosion of compassion, a deep embrace of the universe, and their interpretation of what happens next is that you are now free to leave time and space. You, in the Hindus, called it moksha, escape. To escape samsara. And this up and out cosmology, all the religions of the axial age, in one way or another, are all part of a pattern of an up and out cosmology. We don't want to be on Earth. We got here by accident. It's a veil of tears. We want to get out of here, either by salvation or enlightenment. We want to get out of here. But that leaves fundamentally unexplained. What is the purpose of the universe? What is the purpose of this magnificent creation? And now we have a deeper understanding of the size of existence, the magnitude of the universe, how many billions of years went into the evolving and unfolding of the universe, and it just becomes profoundly unacceptable, short-sighted, to think that the purpose of life is to awaken to your true nature and then escape into nirvana or escape into some off-planet paradise. At a critical point in my work, I had the experience of all of my former lives coming into me. They were just coming in one right after another, and it was like wrapping string, white filament of white light around a kite spool. And at a certain point, all those lives fused into one consciousness. And at that point, there was an explosion of this diamond light out of my chest, and I was catapulted into a deeper state of consciousness than I had ever touched before. And I was an individual, but an individual beyond any frame of reference that I had ever known. And this is what I came to call the birth of the diamond soul. And that is, I think that as we incarnate over and over and over and over again, sooner or later, the soul consciousness that we return to when we die wakes up and manifests inside our time-space consciousness. We literally, the soul wakes up inside time and space, fully conscious, 100,000-year-old being, not a 100-year-old being, fully consciousness with an intuitive awareness of the breadth of human relationships and an ability to enter into deeper communion with the cosmic intelligence. And at that point, we don't leave. At that point, we begin to live differently on the planet. And I think the entire human species is evolving in this direction to this point. The entire human species is evolving into fully manifesting soul consciousness. And, when I say soul consciousness, I don't mean separate, isolated from each other, fully transparent, shunyata, emptiness, anatta, no self-concept, all affirmed, but a soul manifesting consciousness. And if you can imagine a planet of a species filled with souls, fully conscious souls, that species would create a different life on this planet than we've ever seen before. At another point in my work, later in my work, I began, actually over a period of about 4 years, amidst everything else that was going on in my sessions, I began to have dumped into my awareness a series of visions about human evolution. And the message was always the same. We're coming to a turning point, a point of profound spiritual awakening, a before and after in human history, that it would involve tremendous collective purification, but this collective purification was emptying out the kind of the pains of history to lay a new foundation for this infusion, a new infusion of divine energy that was rising up within us. It was clear that, and I was given a taste, glimpses of the future human, a transformed humanity that would emerge out of this. But it never showed me how nature was going to pull this off. It never showed me how this would work. And then several years later, in 1995, when I had already transitioned to the diamond luminosity phase of my work, so I was working at pretty advanced places. On a particular day at the end of 95, when I was expecting to be taken, hopefully, back into the diamond luminosity, instead, it dissolved me into the species. And so Chris Bache just dissolved into the human family. And then as the human family, I was taken into the future, into what I call deep time. And there I began to experience what I came to understand was a death and rebirth process that was impacting the entire human family. Just as an individual goes through an intense death rebirth process when they do spiritual practice or psychedelic practice, history was putting the entire human family into a death rebirth process. I experienced an unraveling of life, a profound loss of control. We were losing control of all the ordinary assumptions of life. There was just a cascading series of crises that were breaking us down level by level. I was not given any details. I wasn't given any calendar of events, but this was a global crisis that seemed to be triggered by a cascading series of ecological crises. Beyond that, I wasn't given the details, but the whole system of life was coming crashing down. And then just when it was at its worst, just when it seemed like we would all be dying, that this was an extinction event, the peak of the storm passed and things began to get easier, and we began to pick ourselves up and we began to rebuild civilization. And when we did, our entire existence was different. We were suffused with new ideas, new ways of thinking, new values, new capacities within the human heart, which generated new social relationships and new social institutions. Somehow going through this profound global systems crisis broke us down, broke us open, and tapped us into the universe at a deeper level than we had ever been tapped into before. So that when we went through this crisis, we were changed profoundly as a species. And what came out of this crisis was not just a new civilization or a new economy or a new industry. What came out of it was literally a new kind of human being. That this is a shift in the plate tectonics of the collective psyche, a shift in the fundamental core of the collective psyche. Now, humanity has been through shifts in the past like this. There was a time when we shifted and our brain size increased 50%. That's an enormous shift. This is something like that. It's a deep shift of the collective psyche, so that every human being born after this takes place will be living, their individual awareness will be alive within a field of a collective awareness which is different than the field that we are in now and today. This is what I call the birth of the future human. And I think the form that the future human will take will be the diamond soul. We are giving birth to a new species on this planet, a species which is spiritually awake, a species which is spiritually mature, and a species which is a soul conscious species, a soul aware species. And by that, I mean something beyond anything that we've ever talked about soul before, because I think our restrictions, our concept of soul have been restricted by assumptions we've been making. And that's why I call it the diamond soul, to signal that this is something new. This is something different. And I think our great spiritual masters, our great saints and saviors, Jesus, the Christ, the Buddhas, the prophets, these have been giving us foreshadowing insights into the nature of the being that we are becoming. They are the prototypes of the being that we are all becoming. And then even later in my journey, I was taken deep into deep time and was given my deepest experience of the future human. And this being is a most magnificent being, just an extraordinarily magnificent, beautiful being of a vast heart, of a mind capable of drinking in deep from the creative intelligence, and a heart capable of experiencing the fundamental oneness of all of life. And a being that experiences the fundamental oneness of life would never hurt another being, not just another human being, never hurt another being. And such a being would build a different world than the world we're building now.
So such a being has no need to evolve.
Oh, I think this is simply the next step in our evolutionary saga. I don't know how long it's going to take for this transition to be effected. I truly don't. I mean, I think it'll be at least generations. Whether it'll be something that will be accomplished in 100 years or several hundred years, I don't know. But however long it takes, let's say it took 1,000 years, which I think is stretching it, because I think we'll be dead if we don't make this transition sooner than that. We are either going to go extinct, I think, or we're going to transition into this new form. Extinction is a tremendous accelerator of evolution. Near extinction, the threat of extinction. However long it takes, whatever we become, evolution isn't going to stop. We've been at this for billions of years. We're going to be at this for billions and billions of years more. There's no telling where we might be going next, and then next after that. So I don't see it as an endpoint or a stopping point. I see it as simply the next point. And the next point is to wake up to what's been really going on, to who we really are, to wake up to the depth and breadth of our relationships with life itself and other people and other species. And then we continue.
Mm. It's been 24 years since you stopped. Do you feel that you have fully integrated all of those experiences?
No, I haven't. When I finished my sessions and was beginning the digesting process, in my meditation, the universe said to me, 20 years in, 20 years out. And I thought, oh, it'll take me 20 years to assimilate 20 years of my journey. And as I was getting to the end, when I was writing Diamonds from Heaven, I thought, that was probably an optimistic assessment. I think it'll take me many lifetimes to fully integrate all the gifts that I've been given.
What do you think, in the light of what you've told us, what you've learned, what you've seen, we most urgently need to address now as a species?
Boy, there's so many layers to that question. I think first we start by taking full responsibility for our shadow, for engaging our shadow and clearing any obstacles and blocks which are impeding our compassion, which are impeding our healthy, whole psychospiritual functioning. We need to reconnect and rediscover our relationship with the universe and our fundamental core identity with the universe. We need to overcome all these several thousand years now of teaching, which places humanity at the top of the evolutionary pyramid and as being unique in kind, and not just unique in degree, but unique in kind and superior to all other life forms, and all other life forms serve us and can be used exploitatively by us. All that has to be transcended. And we have to enter into a renewed communion with the universe, with spiritual reality, and with physical reality. I think we need to recognize that our body is divine, not just our mind and our heart, but our body is part of the manifestation of divinity. Sri Aurobindo thought that humanity eventually would become so spiritually energized that the body was sufficiently psychoplastic that the body had the capacity to live forever. He said his calculation was that it would take 300 years of spiritual practice before we would reach the point where we could set in motion the chain reaction that would have our biological body perpetually refreshing itself as we live in communion with divinity. Now, I don't know about that, but I find it to be an intriguing vision from a profound teacher about the potential that we're activating. What's important is to realize we're just children waking up in the garden that's been underway, being developed for billions of years. We just are beginning to wake up to what's going on, to who we are, to what's happening. We really are like children in the playpen. But I think we're about to get out of the playpen. I think we're about to walk. I think we're about to become mature adults.
You feel that there is an urgent need to get psychedelics back on the table so that their efficacy can be proven and we can start adopting them as a way of helping people to, heal their wounds and hopefully evolve even more quickly.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're a very valuable substance, and fortunately we are reclaiming them after our 40-year interruption. Because these are amplifiers of consciousness, everything hinges on how we use those hours of amplification. If we use those hours of amplification carefully and wisely, then these substances can help us heal the wounds of life. We can go deeper than that. These substances can help us recover the insights of our true nature, of our essential nature, of our fundamental core identity with all other life forms. They open up spiritual platforms within us. I think that psychedelics have a profound philosophical significance. This is a different way of doing philosophy, where we systematically, temporarily expand our mind and then come back and then write it down and then analyze and crunch our experiences and compare them to other people's experiences. One person's experiences are never important by themselves. It's when we get many, many people's experiences and put them all on the table together and begin to find out where the common ground is, what are the common themes that emerge. That's where we begin to develop a truly trustable epistemology, a trustable set of insights into what's going on. So I think these are enormously valuable. They have to be used very carefully. They should be used with great respect. When one amplifies one's consciousness, the dirt comes out of the system. And if you're not prepared to meet that dirt, or you open up under wrong circumstances, it can be terrifying. You can do dangerous things. But if you've taken all the precautions and you open up under the right circumstances, there is nothing that comes out that can't be beneficial if you face it with courage and with grounding and with skill. And I think we are now training the next generation of psychedelic therapists. We are training people to help other people use these substances beneficially.
Well, of course, back in the 60s, there was a move. A lot of people were involved in doing experiments with these to find out how they could be useful to humanity, and they got shut down. Are you hopeful that this time we will be able to move forward with this and find the benefits and allow people to benefit?
I hope so. That seems to be where we're going. The psychedelic renaissance is really focused on personal healing and by treating the conditions that are generated by modern culture, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, addiction, death anxiety. We're using scientific methodologies and carefully framed studies in order to document the beneficial effect of these substances. Now, once we do that, once we establish them and bring them back as legitimate subjects for discussion in scientific and just educated society, then I think we'll be going into the next second and third levels where we'll begin to realize that these capacities, these substances not only have the capacity to heal, but they have the capacity to reveal, to open, to illumine. Now, civilizations have known, indigenous peoples have known this for millennia. Ayahuasca is used in South America going back at least 1,500 years. Peyote, mescaline, mushrooms. Indigenous people have been using these substances to open up spiritual communion for millennia. We're catching up. And so therefore the indigenous people really are our teachers in how to use these substances wisely.
Do you ever wonder why did you have this experience and not someone else?
Well, first, many people have used these substances wisely and have had these and types of these experiences. So I'm just a representative of a whole social movement. And maybe I pushed the edge harder than most, and maybe because of my training, maybe I wrote it down and analyzed it and kind of worked out the details more than most. But I don't see myself as unique in any way. I see myself as part of a social movement. When I got out of graduate school and I met Stan Grof's work, as soon as I met his work, I said, I knew this was my work. This was my calling. It woke up inside. Why that was the case? Eventually, it really came back to decisions that were made when I was in the Bardo before I incarnated, what my soul's work was going to be. And my soul's work really was very much around education and very much around healing, but not psychotherapeutic healing one-on-one, but really engaging healing at a very deep collective level. And I think that there are many, many people working at this level. I think there are many hidden saints working to bring about the birth of the future human. I think there are many bodhisattvas in the world. Some of them are recognized and most of them are not recognized, but who really they invest their life in bringing about the transformation of the lives of others, of helping others and helping us make it through this crisis that we are entering into, the global systems crisis, the ecological crisis that is bearing down on us. It's going to take all of us. I think all of us chose to be here at the time and the form that we incarnated. I think there are no victims. There is no compulsion in reincarnation. We all chose to enter this time in history. We may not remember why, but we chose to be here. We chose to be part of this process.
Chris Bache, thank you. Thank you for joining us and sharing your incredible journey, and thank you for sharing it with the world.
Thank you, Sandie. It's been my honor and pleasure to be in discussion with you today.
Likewise. So, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven. It's published by Inner Traditions, Bear and Company. And for more information about Chris Bache's articles, events, and his other 3 books, The Living Classroom, Teaching in the Collective Consciousness, Dark Night, Early Dawn, Steps to a Deep Ecology of Mind, and Life Cycles, Reincarnation and the Web of Life. Visit his website at chrisbache.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back with another edition of What is Going On at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Chris Bache.
Thank you, Sandie.